So yes, I want to thank everybody again for being here. I'm going to go over a few slides that are very, very high level and just stress some of the ideas that brought this workshop to being. And so I'm going to go through some of the rationale for us getting together and highlight some of the ambiguities and kind of the looseness in the terms we're using when we refer to interoperability and ARDs. Hopefully motivate a little bit why we're here and just follow a little bit the philosophy that Chris has outlined, which is really surmount, go into action, but starting to talk about the actual implementations of the underlying code that that powers interoperability and analysis-ready data, and then iterate back into the implementation of the standards rather than going on a standard that then has to be implemented by people who were not the ones who wrote it. So the idea here is really to shift the power of defining some of those standards to the actual personas that are actually implementing them. So first of all, welcome everybody again. This is super exciting. Again, as Chris has said many times, the expectations have been more than fulfilled. I'm excited. I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I'm having a little bit of imposter syndrome right now because it's very humbling to have you guys in the room. I want to talk a little bit about two buzzwords that come and go all the time in the realm of satellite interoperability. Just a couple of words about myself. My name is Ignacio Zuleta. I've been helping Chris organize this workshop. I work at Planet Labs. We've been around for 7 years now. I've been at the company for 4. I run our payload and imaging group, so calibration, payload development, all that kind of good stuff. And one of my jobs is trying to bring together many different types of data sources we have inside our own platform. Even before we go to bring other data, we have to make our own data interoperable, right? We serve a lot of data sets that are produced by our own satellites. So interoperability is a day-to-day challenge in trying to help our customers and scientists use our data. So we decided to start looking into some strategies, and we realized that we're not going to be able to do this alone. It's going to be something the industry as a whole will have to undertake. So I went outside and started attending some of the meetings. I've been going for many years to JC and last year to PECORA. And so just talking to people and understanding how can we accelerate the adoption of standards so when we implement interoperability on our end, it's really what we all are implementing as an industry. So our data is interoperable. So we have two terms that are used pretty loosely here. One is ARD, analytics ready data. What that means is, pretty contentious. I think it can mean many different things. Then we have interoperability, and they're kind of usually used, mixed in the same conversation, but they mean many different things operationally. So I wanted to just go through some of the thoughts that come into mind in terms of what these two things are. So when it comes to ARDs, what I have in mind is this idea of data that is ready for analysis. And just to bring this one level down, what we're talking about is about user experience. It's about how the data behaves in the hand of the users. The other aspect is, when you start thinking about that, is that you're really talking about processing levels of satellite imagery. So a lot of the ARD discussions and standardization is about different levels of processing of the data that can be really single source. There's no really interoperability questions. You can make data that is ready for analysis if it's very high level of data, and it may be from a single source. Ideally, we want ARDs to be cloud-based. We're moving to an age in which we shouldn't be really moving rasters around. What we're moving really is schemas that helps us essentially order that data, including springing the right algorithms on the back end of services to be operating on the data. And also, we want a system that is fully version controlled, so ARDs can be essentially, versioned as we increment the version and as we improve the algorithms that create the analysis-ready data. And finally, we want it to be scientific grade. We want the data to be something that somebody can use to prove or disprove a scientific theory, somebody could use to resolve an international dispute, something that could be used in a court of law. So it has to be, it's a piece of scientific data. So we need really scientific traceability end to end. When it comes to interoperability, we're really talking about something a little bit lower level. We're talking about really operational interoperability. We're talking about data formatting, APIs. We're talking about sensor interoperability. Can we make the data so that we don't have to know what sensor it came from? we're talking about really roadmaps of agencies and companies converging together, right? I mean, when is USGS going to process certain data levels that we use in our own corrections, for example? So how do we have interoperable relationships between people so we all release products at the same time? It's also about decentralized data that sits in many different sources. So we're going to be doing sensor fusion, and we don't necessarily need a model where all the data sits in one central repository. It has to be a collection of schemas and standards that allows us to have the data sitting in multiple places without breaking our workflows. So it boils down to APIs. A lot of it is really definitions of endpoints between services. And a lot of it is really, I would call it systems management. I was with the Landsat Science team meeting last week, and one of the things that came to the fore in the discussion was the incompatibility of the management processes with which people manage software development and things like that, right? So organizations sometimes cannot even exchange a document that describes what the interface is, for example. So interoperability is like one level down from analysis-ready data in my mind. And so in practice, interoperability is something that enables analytics-ready data. And what we really want is an interoperable analytics-ready data set. We want a data set that can be generated by any company, any agency, that it essentially is built out of interoperable parts. It might be used in sensor fusion, or it might be the result of sensor fusion. So interoperability and ARDs, they're two buzzwords. So we decided to get together for 3 days and start, at least ourselves from the commercial sector, get into the conversation of how that plays into our own workflows and roadmaps, and we reduce the fragmentation. So there's public efforts, there is the commercial sector, and then the other big element is the emergence of small sats as data sets that are going to be providing in a decentralized, distributed fashion a lot of the longitudinal data sets that are used in a lot of studies. So we were really, the reason we need to bring interoperability here is because we need to also ensure that all these new sources of data that are monitoring surveying missions can be integrated with the rest of the science that has been done with, for example, Landsat and Sentinel. So that's why we decided to do this workshop, to see what's the interest in understanding to have a commercial sector-led venue to start defining some of those standards and bringing in governments and NGOs to be part of the conversation, to spearhead an effort that resembles what Chris is describing for STAC, essentially, is having the standard be a record of what has actually been done rather than a proposal for standardization. So we have here a program. So we're going to be, I'm going to finish talking here. We're going to have a small hour of what we call meet and greet, which is we're going to probably open the floor and use the hour to go through a rapid fire introductions and with the rest of the group. And then we're going to go into a set of keynotes. So we're going to start between 3 and 5:30. We're going to have a pretty nice set of keynotes, mostly from our sponsors. These are really going to be really exciting. And then tomorrow, we're moving into 2 different blocks. We're going to have the entire morning is going to be commercial implementations of analytics-ready data, different pipelines, APIs that are essentially being proposed or used, and including some descriptions of data providers like ourselves at Planet. And then in the afternoon, we're going to move into existing ARD standards and proposals and implementations. And the idea here is in the morning, we're going to be doing these lightning type of talks, one after the other. The afternoon is going to be sets of 3 talks followed by a panel. So every talk will be 15, 20 minutes. We'll stop, park, bring the speakers, and then discuss essentially the theme in the block. And then on Wednesday, we're going to go pretty deep into one of the cornerstones of interoperability, which is the methodology underlying essentially sensor fusion, right? So we have a full day on Wednesday of methodology and science, which is specific examples of the sensor fusion portion of interoperability and some scientific applications of it. So this is generally the program. And I was thinking about deliverables. It's very hard to do this because it's the first time we do it. So one of the things I need help from you is I'm going to be sending surveys in the next couple of days, is starting to define, do we want something like this to happen again? And what do you believe are the actual deliverables, right? So what I can think of in terms of deliverables is starting to think about certain topics. The first one is, of course, to meet each other and establish some critical mass for starting to implement some of these solutions. There is a lot of different ARD standards, so discussing about essentially how comparatively they I don't want to say they perform, but what do they entail? So this is going to be conversations for Wednesday at the end of the day. We have a very long panel. Then a very big part of this is benchmark data sets. And this is something that meaningful benchmark data sets, when you're mixing public data and private data, has been one of the biggest bottlenecks. So what the commitment in the industry we can have together to provide ongoing, never-ending benchmark data sets, which means essentially regions of the world where all companies are going to throw free data that we can use to benchmark analytics-rated data. So, and this is something very important for companies in particular. The other thing that we need to start thinking about is a little bit about aligning roadmaps. There's big efforts right now to reprocess parts of the Landsat archive. There's going to be improvements on the Sentinel and Copernicus side. We have our own product roadmaps. Other companies have their own product roadmaps. It doesn't, when those roadmaps are misaligned, since all products at the end of the day are sensor fusion products, there is a lot of cost of misalignment when different levels of collection types get released and they don't get used right away. So I think we need to start talking about generally the roadmaps that are involved in reprocessing and upgrading and improving these big catalogs of data, in particular for survey data. And then the other one is, how do we go about reference implementations? We talk about ARDs, and an ARD is going to be 7 levels of processing. There's going to be things like geometry, harmonization, georeferencing, geometric camera models, radiance, reflectance, all of that. So the fractured kind of landscape in each of these layers of the analytics-rated data stack leads to lack of interoperability due to fractured implementation. So one of the things that would be interesting to start thinking about is a third-party open source repository where reference implementations of analytics-rated data can be held and again implemented. So people literally go and commit their implementations there. And then the other topic that is in my mind is, for us in the private sector, is how do we go about coordinating a long-term strategy for public data set ingest in things like, in the cloud. And I don't want to be specific of what cloud, but there is essentially efforts to bring some of that data. A lot of that data to be actionable has to be collocated with essentially everybody else. And it's not clear to me there is a long-term sustainable strategy to collocate the right levels of processing on the cloud in the long term. So these are things that if we could talk to each other in the next 3 days and have some thoughts about these topics, I think it would really move the conversation one notch forward. So let's get to work. So this is all I have. I don't know, I wanted to keep it very high level and not be very distracting. And yeah, I'll also open the floor if there's any other things in this list that somebody would like to get in the next 3 days. But other than that, we're going to have a lot of breaks and networking opportunities and panels. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for conversations. So I think I'm going to stop here. Yep.